Hello, good morning. My name is Neil Arwin Mercado, reporter for INQUIRER.net, and this is the Inside Look. Joining us here today is Philippine National Police spokesperson, Brigadier General Ildebrandi Usana. Sir, good morning. Kamusta po kayo?
Good morning po, sir. Thank you for having me po.
Thank you for accepting our invite, sir. So, sir, simulan natin yung ating pag-uusap ngayong umaga with some numbers, sir. So, kagabi nga, as you know, sir, the president met with some members of the IATF, and among those who presented was PNP Chief Sinat, sir. And he presented some numbers regarding the implementation of the quarantine here in the NCR Plus. So, according to him, sir, as of April 12, for those who do not know, as of April 12, we have the PNP, according to the report of PNP, we have 52,745 violators of minimum public health standard here in the NCR Plus, sir. So, sir, can you talk about what these violations are?
We have a number of violations with regard to not wearing face masks, not wearing face shield. Of course, there are violators as well as crimes-related violations. With respect to these crimes, these are being considered by some police officers subject for arrest, like illegal possession of drugs, production of RT-PCR, fake RT-PCR results. And then there are also instances where some men got involved in public drinking as well as illegal cockfighting. Except for these, there have been no arrests made on ECQ violations. We are talking about the last 2 weeks, no? Out of the 52,740 violations, more than 50% were simply warned. They just simply were advised by our police officers to perhaps comply with the minimum public health standards. Then secondly, 25% were simply required to pay fines based on the LGU ordinances. And then all the others, appropriate actions were taken in relation to the implementation of RA 11332.
So, sir, you mentioned that no arrests were made. So what was the, let's say, policy of the PNP when it comes to pag dito sa mga violators ng quarantine protocols natin? What was the order from the PNP chief, sir?
Well, this is an offshoot, of course, of the instructions coming from no less than the president himself, that there must be no arrest that shall be made over erring offenders as regards the violations of quarantine procedures, the minimum public health standards in particular. For after all, we have had a number of controversies that we faced last year. And this time, the Chief PNP wanted that arrest shall not be part of our interventions with regard to any violations that are being committed by our people, especially if they're simply not wearing their face mask or face shield or violating the physical distancing and all that. All these were simply subjected to either warning, advice, or simply required to have a little seminar in between. And then at most, they are just being fined in relation to the existing LGU ordinances in the different localities.
Sir, you mentioned that no one is being arrested. That was the order from the president himself, that there should be no arrests, especially if, ano lang naman to, sir, violations of the quarantine protocols. Then how do you know, sir, about the incident in General Trias, Cavite, sir, right? Where a curfew violator died after allegedly being asked to do a physical exercise by the police, sir. So how do we, in these instances, sir, they are not warned, they are not fined, then how do we list them if they are not arrested when they were asked to do such actions?
Well, the case in General Trias emanated from a turnover made by the apprehending barangay tanons of about 8 violators to the police. And, you know, supposedly the police, in hindsight, should have thought of maybe advising these people to go back to their respective houses because they found to have violated curfew hours. But then again, well, one thing led to another. The 2 police officers instead required allegedly these 8 violators to take some physical exercises instead.
Mm-hmm.
And that did not sit well, of course, with our requirement to ensure that once they are in the custody of the police, they should
Mm-hmm.
simply be released right away, even if
Mm-hmm.
documentation is necessary. But maybe they didn't even know the implication of requiring 100 times physical exercises, and
Mm-hmm.
accordingly, this pumping exercise and all that.
Mm-hmm.
And the originally the chief of police denied that indeed physical exercises were imposed on the violators, but the provincial director went straight to General Trias to determine the truth. And true enough, two witnesses, two of the violators actually executed a sworn affidavit stating, among others, that indeed physical exercises were done on them. So as a result, the chief of police was relieved. But it was actually an option to the turnover. So there were actually no arrests made after all. However, if you are to place someone in your custody as a police officer, a case must actually be filed, but that didn't happen. I just didn't know whether when the police officers required these violators to have the physical exercises, it might have been construed as um, some sort of in lieu of any case that may be filed against them. But that didn't happen. So eventually they were relieved from their position, and the administrative investigation is now being handled by the provincial director.
Mm-hmm, sir. So you said, sir, that it's not an arrest, even if they are in the custody of the police when this happens, sir. Then how do we document these cases, sir? Are these cases being documented, sir, that we ask these curfew violators to do some physical exercises? Should the police officers document this?
That's the
What's
case.
the
In
what's the
fact,
protocol, sir, within the PNP
they
whenever these things are being done?
supposedly, if anyone is placed under the custody of police for a violation that they may have committed, a case should have been filed by the police officer. Uh, the reason why arrest was made. But if you didn't have any basis to arresting a person, then you have to release the guy. Uh, and in this case, even if there were no arrests made by the police, the turnover suggests that placing the person into custody means you have to have reason for doing so. And in that regard, the chief of police should also have taken action. If there were indeed violations, then maybe a case should have been filed, but that didn't happen at all. So, therefore, when the physical exercises were made, this wasn't even part of the interventions with regard to how the violators probably would uh, some sort of take action, or rather accommodate the response coming from the police in their case. So, well, this happened in the past. Some actually brought the violators to cemetery, and sometimes they are placed in a makeshift facility overnight while waiting for the disposition of their case. And then others actually were charged for, among others, disobedience, if not assault against an agent of a person in authority, all these things. No? So if you do not have any basis at all to arresting a person, you should release him. Under no circumstances that that person should stay longer than is expected. So that's the reason our police officers are familiar with the rules on arrest, and the GPNP wanted that no arrest shall be made, because if you arrest a person, there must be a case to be filed against them.
Kasi sir, baka magkaroon na lang ng there might be this assumption that whenever we talk about arrest, it's simply about placing a person behind bars, sir. So in this case, sir, yung mga let's say violation of a curfew or failure to follow quarantine protocols, is this enough basis? Because sir, you mentioned earlier that if you're going to, if a police officer would put someone in under their custody, there should be a basis, sir. Ito bang quarantine violation, sir, and violation of curfew hours, sir, is this enough basis to put a person under police custody?
It's not necessary, I think. We have basis to even requiring the violators to simply comply with what is lacking. For example, if they are not wearing masks, then we just advise them to wear masks. If they are not properly wearing their face shield, then we have to advise the violator to simply wear their shield properly and all that. And it's not necessary they should be arrested, because if we're talking about the number of violators, we could not perhaps afford to bring time and again these violators to the police station for purposes of the booking procedures, as we call this, in the context of arrest. That's the reason the chief PNP wanted set aside how arrests are to be considered part of our interventions, because that is not necessary. And if this is simply a violation of the minimum public health standards, we just have to warn them. And if necessary, the LGU could just impose appropriate fines over erring constituents. And there are, of course, exceptions. One is if a person creates something that borders on disobedience or becomes unruly, perhaps, or there is an attempt to even assault the authorities. And that is one thing that may be subject also for having the person arrested.
This is, ito kasi sir yung mahirap ngayong quarantine period, sir. Some people might not be aware of their rights din, sir, because we also have rights in this instances, sir. So let's first start off with the fine, sir. The people should know, sir, if I understood it correctly, that there should be a local ordinance whenever with regard to fines, right, sir? The police officer cannot simply ask a violator to, okay, you have to pay your fine if there is no local ordinance in place. Tama po, sir?
That's right, sir. There must be basis to even requiring a citizen to pay fine. And that basis should be a local government ordinance that requires their citizen to do so. And insofar as appropriate sanctions are concerned, even warning may also be one of them. Meaning, for example, if the ordinances would spell out the graduated kind of responses with regard to a certain violation, it might start with simple warning on first offense. Second offense, it may be the violator may be required to pay a fine of 500 pesos. The third offense may be 1,000, so on and so forth. But that depends on each of the LGUs concerned. There is one city, for example, in the metropolis that requires immediate arrest of the violator of the ordinance. So that means there are no warnings, there are no fines, simply arrest. And that means filing of cases against the violator. So they vary. It goes from one city to another, or one municipality to another. That's the reason, insofar as the implementation of the minimum public health standards, we have to refer also to some LGUs that would treat each violation as a basis for how they regard specific violations as subject for any particular sanction. One of the measures, of course, is once you are charged with the violation of ordinance, the option may be for you to undergo some kind of community service activities in place of imprisonment or fine. So that means you have to maybe engage yourself in sweeping some of the streets, or probably plant trees, or do some waste management and all that. So after some time, when you are done doing this, then you are already complied with the requirements of the ordinances. It is the Philippine National Police that enforces these ordinances along with the barangay officials. Because if you look at the ordinances in the hierarchy of our laws, these are considered light offenses. However, it is the Chief PNP's instruction that even if there are violations and they are considered light offenses, and there are ordinances that punish these kind of acts, the chief PNP requires the police not to file any action anymore.
Mhm.
They are just simply warned. I mean, the violators simply warned, and at most they are fined. That depends, of course, on the LGU requirement itself.
Mhm. Sir, you mentioned kanina na one of the possible grounds for arrest is disobedience, sir. Can you talk about that? What is disobedience, sir? Para alam ng mga ating mga manonood kung what could be a ground for an arrest during the quarantine period. Because you mentioned that if it's simply not wearing of face shield, not wearing of face mask, or maybe curfew violation, that is something that might fall under a warning or a fine. But what is under arrest?
Well, we give it to the ground troops. No, we rather consider this as something that borders on how they consider an act as an act of disobedience. But in general, we have to understand there are people who really are pasaway, as we call them, to the extent of challenging our authorities, no, whether police officers or barangay
Mhm.
tanons. And this act of defiance against our authorities, it may also be interpreted as a defiance against the ordinances that are being imposed against those violators. So
Mhm.
in this case, the police authority can exercise their role in law enforcement in relation to the violation that was committed, which is under the revised penal code, the disobedience, if I'm not mistaken, Article 151. No? Therefore, if the violation in so far as disobedience is concerned requires the police officer to arrest the person, the violator himself, then he could be brought to the police station, not on the basis of not wearing face mask or face shield, but the act of disobedience he committed against the authorities.
Mhm. Because that is where that's a very very thin line, sir. Eh. Itong let's say, what if you're just asking the police officer na, sir, I heard Brigadier General Usana say that I cannot be arrested for simply not wearing a face shield, and then a police officer might say you're under arrest for refusing to for refusing arrest. That is that something, sir? That what happens now, sir? If that's the case, sir, that a person insists on his right, but then a police officer might interpret that naman, sir, as refusal of to follow authority.
Well, being pasaway is something that really borders on challenging the authorities. No, you already were
Mhm.
given the advice, you actually were warned, and you didn't comply. But there is also another element for the police officers, the reason why no arrests were being made, and that is maximum tolerance. We are requiring our police officers to be uh, courteous, professional, and at the same time exercise that is a degree of maximum tolerance. And when we say maximum tolerance, it may mean a lot of things for police officers. You have to be so patient, even if you are being challenged so much by the violator, then you do not have to react accordingly. So that's about it. I guess the reason why no arrests were being made, even if we know that there are some violators who would really test the patience of our police officers. Last year,
Mhm.
it was different. You try to defy the authorities, then you will be arrested. But of course, you will have to refer this now to the existing cases involving the violations where courts have to still hear them. And you could just imagine if we are in a quarantine or maybe having this problem on the judicial system, it might take some time before these are being resolved, these cases are being resolved. So that means it may also be counterproductive to having charges filed in courts because we know too well because the influx of these cases would also be tantamount to court docket congestions, and that we will not allow as well because the courts have already had many other cases that they need to attend to.
Mhm. So I would like to quickly go back lang dito sa General Trias case before we wrap this up with the ECQ implementation, MECQ protocol, sir. You mentioned that it's still currently under investigation. Tama, sir? The investigation on this is still ongoing?
That's right, sir. Administrative case.
Mhm.
Maybe the police are also looking into the possible criminal action against the
Mhm.
two police officers who required physical exercises. Well, just to disabuse the mind of uh, idea as far as physical exercises are concerned. Physical exercise is not bad. It's good for the
Mhm.
health, and that may have been the reason why the police officers wanted that instead of facing any kind of complaint, they'd rather undergo the physical exercises. But excessive exercise is bad. And that could have
Mhm.
happened to the one of the violators who accordingly was afflicted with certain disease. And we
Mhm.
still do not know whether the acts committed by the police officers would have um, um, bearing on the medical history of Mr. Darren Penaredondo. And the
Mhm.
doctor will have to also explain this. In that case, we have to go back to the motive. Is there a criminal motive or criminal intent on the part of the two police officers that Mr. Peñarodondo suffer unjustly? If that's the case, then they will have to face criminal action coming to be filed by the police. Until then, administrative case will be the basis uh, for putting sanctions over the erring personnel. One for misconduct because they should not have done that in the first place. It's not even part of the ordinances we suppose, and I guess even the police officers are aware that coming from the instructions of the GPNP, it is also a form of defiance because no arrest should also be made on any of the violators of the minimum public health standards.
Mhm. Mhm. Sir, criminal charges, it's one thing. Administrative charges, it's a different thing, sir. At least on the administrative charges side, sir, um, are we going to file those, sir? Because
Yes,
you
in
mentioned,
fact,
sir, kanina, sir, na they should not be arrested. I think we have established already that they did put Mr. Peña Redondo under their custody. So at least under that circumstance, sir, because the death, I understand, sir, that what you're mentioning about it should be proven, that the intent and so on. But with the administrative charges, sir, when it comes to them putting Mr. Peña Redondo under their custody, is that will
definitely.
charges be filed on those, on that ground?
We do not want to preempt the ongoing investigation by the provincial director of Cavite, but we really are anticipating sanctions will be imposed on the erring police officers. Of course, they have defied the orders coming from the GPNP itself. They even
Mhm.
didn't know the implication of putting these violators in their custody. And third, physical exercises are not even considered as a punishment, and they should not have imposed this to anyone.
Mhm.
And this happened in the past. In fact, sanctions were also imposed on the erring
Mhm.
members of the PNP last year after complaints had been filed by the victims themselves. So in this case, it's no difference. We still have to fulfill our duties to ensure that justice must be served as well. But as far as the chief of police and the two police officers are concerned, they really will have to face sanctions based
Mhm.
on our existing administrative disciplinary machinery.
Now let's go to our next topic, sir, which is the ECQ naman, sir. Basically, the transition lang. There's just a few questions we have, sir, from our viewers. I asked a few of my friends then if they would have any questions to you. Sir, first question would be, what is the main difference between our implementation of ECQ or transition from ECQ to MECQ? Because once we say it's modified, it's still ECQ, so it's still the highest form of highest category of the quarantine, but it's a little bit ease compared to just ECQ when we talk about MECQ. So what's the main difference going to be for the PNP with the implementation of our quarantine guidelines?
Well, let us first discuss the balance between ensuring health and safety of our people and the economy that we still have to maintain or even take care of, no? Because we need to make a living for ourselves, and our people really are in need of jobs and all that. Now, as far as what transpired last year, literally the economy was closed. But this time, even if there was ECQ that was imposed by the government, the economy relatively was still open. And what is the implication of this? It might be quite difficult for our police officers to enforce appropriately the strict adherence to the ECQ protocols. So much so that some people, especially those who are considered non-essential, would try to sneak in and maybe challenge the efficiency of our police officers to do the checkpoint along the way. Last year, we defined who among those are uppers, those with quarantine pass, those non-essential, and of course, there were cases filed against our police officers. But now we have learned our lesson fast. In the implementation of the ECQ, we adjusted enough. We were able to make our police officers prudent enough to understand the predicament of our people. That's the reason why simple warning is advised to the violators. There are instances, however, if you are an APOR, for example, and you could not even show any proof like ID and all, you are advised to come back to your place of origin. The non-essential, of course, are being checked closely by our police officers at the quarantine control points. But because of the entire stretch of the road where traffic congestions also happen, there are some instances where police officers would rather ease the burden of our passengers, of our motorists, and therefore we would not want to create difficulty on the part of our people to just continue their day-to-day activities under these circumstances. That was the ECQ kind of scheme that we have adopted this year. Um, and now that we are into the MECQ, a little ease may be felt by our people. And that means uh, for public transport, there will be certain limitations, of course, but they will also feel ease with regard to every checkpoint that has to be handled by our police officers. Of course, there are some non-essentials now that are required by the government to operate only to a certain percentage in terms of the nature of the establishments that they are working in. And of course, the entire uppers are allowed to also work 100% in full capacity, so to speak. And well, basically, when we speak of quarantine protocols, we are only talking about essential and non-essential persons. And for those who have experienced similar actions taken by the government last year, considered as non-essential, they do not have to get out again because they are not allowed. We're referring to those below 18 years of age and above 65, those people who are not supposed to be working uh, on the virtue of what the government was telling them. I guess they already have understood enough, but we have to repeat um, information after information on the basis of the omnibus guidelines set forth by the IATF. But we also have to adjust again with the way the LGU also handles its own protocols on quarantine, because there are some LGUs that really are imposing stricter um, procedures on their own lockdowns. Therefore, while the IATF is issuing general guidelines, the local government units have also to be responsible as well on their own turf, notwithstanding that the IATF also has issued its own. We just have to make sure that the balance is there. The police officers will also have to understand that the LGU has its own system to consider, and we also have the ITF that is also requiring the PNP to do this and do that. So these are the things, I guess, that make a difference with regard to imposing the
Mhm.
MECQ during.
So in closing na lang, sir, one final question, sir. How do we So I watched one of your interviews, sir, one of your television interviews. You mentioned that the PNP learned a lot from its experiences last year. I mean, we know about the cop shooting incident, a cop shooting a mother and son. We know about that. That was a highly publicized story here in the Philippines, sir. You mentioned the PNP learned a lot from its experiences before, sir. Can you elaborate on that, sir? And how can you assure the public that the police is someone they should not be afraid of, especially when because sir, the CHR recently published a report saying about the drug war and PNP and that PNP I just like to do I don't want to misquote it, but it says the PNP used excess and unreasonable force and had intent to kill in this human rights in this drug operation, sir. So how can you assure, sir, the Filipinos right now that the police force is someone that they should not be afraid
Well, if you look at how many among Filipinos would look forward to becoming police officers, that is an indicator that they would rather serve the people because they belong to the Philippine National Police. Every time we have 10,000 applicants to be offered to anyone who is qualified to become police officer, and there are many applicants uh, trying to get in the police service, which means there is always this um, some sort of principle that comes with being a police officer. We really are here to serve and protect our people. Whatever it is that may have happened in the past, it did not even reflect about 1 or 2% of the entire population of the Philippine National Police. You're talking about Nuesca, you're talking about maybe some few bad eggs in the organization that actually were dismissed. We have what we call internal cleansing that caused the dismissal of 8,400 police officers out of the 17,000 erring members of the PNP that started from July of 2016 up to date. You could just imagine of the more number of police officers doing good to our people. They are considered unsung heroes because they didn't want that whatever good deeds that they do, it should be flaunted to the public. What we are simply doing now is what we are as police officers. We have
of.
sworn to serve and protect our people. And whatever it is that may be viewed against our police officers, we never tolerated all these acts. Of course, some of the accusations leveled against us may have come from those who would like to destroy the government, no, for the sake of it. Yet, if you look at how our people relate themselves with the police, they would always look up to our police officers as among those that really provide the kind of services that they deserve.
Mhm. So
So
despite sir
you get
despite
to
the
the different localities from maybe not here in NCR alone, because NCR seems to be the basis of leveling accusations against our police officers. But
mm,
all around, outside of the NCR, you can find a lot of police officers doing their level best to serve our people, and the people are really appreciative of what our police officers are doing.
so
Beyond,
despite the Nuesca issue, despite the alleged links of police with the death of Calbayog City Mayor, sir, despite the itong incident with Mr. Penaredondo and the curfew violation, despite this report from the Commission on Human Rights regarding the anti-drug operation, sir, you can say that the Filipinos should not be afraid of the police.
yes, because that, after all, is an injustice also to more than 220,000 other police officers who are risking their lives. We already have 17,000 plus positive of virus among our
Mm-hmm.
police officers, and to date we have 46 casualties.
Mm-hmm.
We are actually risking our lives. We could have probably turn um, our attention to something else and pretend that nothing is happening around us, even if we are being asked by our people to for assistance and all, and yet we are still doing this 24/7. The people may not have understood this enough, but every now and then, even if we are calling ourselves as having an off duty, whenever people are calling for us, we will be there. Again, the kind of Nuesca and a few some police officers who may have committed infractions of law, all these are being attended to by the PNP. We never condone any of their acts. But this should not diminish the way the PNP is doing its level best to provide our people the services that they need from us. Kumbaga sa Tagalog pa po, kahit na po sabihing napakasama na ng ng isang police officer, pag kailangan ng tulong ng ating kapulisan, nandiyan po siya para magsilbi sa ating mga mamayan. So, and then we are a survivor, no? Nag-survive kami sa dami ng mga naging problema in the past. And for having survived all this, we know that at the end of the day, we just have to be more professional than ever. I guess in any human endeavor, hindi po talaga mayaalis yung mga ganitong problema, no? At siguro hindi rin maituturing na hangarin ng mga mamayan maging perfect ang organization natin. Ang layunin lang po namin kung ano yung sinumpaan po namin, ayun po ang makikita ng ating mga mamayan. We have to understand these police officers also are coming from the communities. Sila po ay part ng general population. Ano man ang akusasyon na nile-level sa ating mga kapulisan ay reflective din po ng lipunan na ating kinagagalawan. Pero sa sinumpaan po namin, kahit gaano po kasama ang ilan sa aming mga naging police officers na tinanggal din po, hindi po ito ang magbibigay ng dahilan para hindi po namin bigyan pansin yung pangangailangan ng mamamayan. Take note, sir, kahit saan po kayo magpunta, the most visible government employees at work are the police officers. Kahit siguro nasa bingit po kayo ng problema, pag kayo ay dumaan sa isang napakadilim na lugar, most likely hindi nyo naman ho tatawagin ang social worker habang kayo ay nagdarasal. Hindi nyo rin tatawagin ng nurse or doktor. Hindi nyo rin tatawagin maari ang Navy or sino pa mang mga naka-uniforme. Ang lagi pong tatawagin natin ay sana po, Diyos ko, may police po dito. So yun po yung mensahe na kailangan ko rin maipabot, na ang police ay sadya po talagang nandyan upang magsilbi sa ating mga mamayan po.
Okay po. And with that, thank you so much. Again, that is Philippine National Police Spokesperson, Brigadier General Ildebrandi Usana. Thank you so much po, sir. Have a great day, sir. And
Salamat po,
please
sir.
stay safe, sir.
Salamat po, sir. God bless po. Ingat po kayo, sir.
Okay po.